Chapter 5. Shadow of Malevolence. Legion. Shadow of Malevolence. Great leaders inspire greatness in others. The day after the battle trials, the group were unfortunately caught up in a huge crowd of reporters that were clogging up the entrance to the school, practically harassing students with questions. The topic? All Might. Because of course it had to be him. While the group tried to make their way through, Tinya, bless him, sacrificed himself by giving a monologue interview and subtly motioning everybody to walk past. Django tried the same thing, but everybody immediately grabbed him, shut his mouth, and dragged him inside. No need for an All Might PR scandal, right? You won't be forgotten, Tinya, Izuku whispered as he and the rest entered. Eventually, however, the teachers came by and cleared the crowd, as the last of the students went inside. A reporter had the bright idea of trying to go in. Ignoring the warnings of her peers, she was stopped by the UA barrier. None noticed the man in black behind the crowd, staring, smirking. Izuku was one of the last to enter the classroom. He noticed that Bakugo was already in there, but he was oddly quiet, reserved. His eyes spoke wonders of hatred. Izuku merely sighed before taking his seat. The rest of his classmates following suit. Soon enough, Aizawa came in and started homeroom. All right, I've reviewed the videos from yesterday's class. We'll be doing in-depth analysis later, but I want to cover some key points right now, he said before directing his gaze to Bakugo. Bakugo, you already spoke with the principal, so I won't repeat it, but you're not a child. Don't let your ego control your actions. Bakugo grunted but nodded, still stuck in his thoughts. Disobey another direct order from your teachers, young Bakugo, and you will be summarily transferred to general education. That being said, Midoriya, he faced Izuku, who stilled. You could have ended the fight much quicker. This isn't the place for grudge matches. In the real world, you take care of threats quickly and efficiently. Yes, sir. Bring out Django.
Ah, Okowo.
Summoning him, Django was uncharacteristically quiet, or rather, he already knew that the situation was more serious. You already knew about this. Don't encourage your brother. Todoroki, don't underestimate your opponents, and remember, heroes aren't one-trick ponies. Todoroki also grunted but nodded. All of you have taken the first steps into your careers as heroes. You'll make plenty of mistakes, which is why it's important to fix them now. Plenty of heroes go into the field unprepared. It's why they die. All of you need to work hard, otherwise you'll be expelled at the drop of a hat. Aizawa stated. Some of the students shivered, but others took it as a challenge to honestly improve. Now, on to the next part of your careers. The atmosphere was turning intense, and all of them stared at their teacher with apprehension. You need to pick a class president. It's a normal high school activity. The sheer cacophony of students vying for the position was ridiculous, each one trying to come up with their own reasons as to why they should be chosen. Izuku himself was a bit unsure if he wanted to, but after discussing it with Django and some of the clones, he agreed that it would be good for developing leadership experience. One day you'll be leading thousands of us. You need to start now. Just because we know each other doesn't mean that it'll be the same in a fight. Everybody, let us decide this by a vote. He was broken from his thoughts by Ida's loud declaration. Izuku admitted that the idea was sound, however. What's to prevent everybody from just voting for themselves? Then whoever gains the most votes will have proven themselves in the eyes of the classroom. That, or we could just make a rule that you can't vote for yourself. Izuku trailed off. Ida paused, blinked, and nodded. That could work. Aizawa-sensei? I don't care. Just let me sleep. An awkward pause filled the room before everybody collectively shrugged and continued their clamors for presidency. Izuku Midoriya, 12 votes. Ida Tinya, 5 votes. Yaoyorozu Momo, 2 votes. Bakugo Katsuki, 1 vote. You still voted for yourself? Django chuckled out as Bakugo growled. Okay, didn't expect this. Izuku admitted as he and Tinya stood next to each other in front of the class. Bakugo had returned to his normal self and was going apoplectic in rage, but Izuku had long since learned how to tune him out. I'm glad to be able to work with you, Izuku. So am I, Tinya. Aizawa merely slept. During lunch hour, Izuku's little group of friends were talking about the classes they'd already started. It's kind of surreal. Our teachers are heroes, yet they act so normal. Izuku hummed while eating his food. Django and Fordo were actually next to him. The having discovered the joy of food thanks to Inko and was taking advantage of the opportunity. So, class prez, how does it feel? Bit surreal, but I'm glad that I have the opportunity and the class trust. I honestly didn't expect that many votes. Well, you and Django have both proven yourselves to be pretty good leaders during the battle trials. Ochako said while snacking on some mochi. True. I voted for Tinya. You're a bit stiff, but you get the job done. Thank you, Izuku. I am honored by your choice. I admit that I voted for you as well. Tinya, be honest, you're stupid rich. I mean, you certainly look like it. Django snorted at Ochako's bluntness, but couldn't help but agree. Well, I wanted to hide this until later, but have you ever heard of the Iditen Agency? Led by Ingenium, right? Fordo asked while eating rice. He's got over 65 sidekicks. Django said while scarfing down some dumplings. Family legacy too. Izuku finished as he drank some water. It's a trio of hero nerds. The rest thought with amusement. Yes, well, he's my older brother. That's awesome. So cool. That's super cool, Tinya. I won. Hey, that's my Katsudon. Izuku yelled as he fought off Django's chopsticks before slamming Fordo's arm onto the table and pinning it. The rest of the group stared as the three started to fight over the last piece of Katsudon. It became an entire martial arts battle of chopsticks with admittedly good choreography and a compelling script somewhere in the end before degenerating into a slapstick show. This is our class president now. The group thought in amusement, but they couldn't help but feel a certain joy in seeing the group of brothers. Unfortunately for them, that joy would not last as an alarm sounded off. Tinya was the first to ask what was happening, and hearing about an intruder on the grounds made all of them panic. Caught up in the crowd of students, Izuku was slammed into a window where he saw that the entire problem was due to the media. The media? You've got to be kidding me. He growled out before turning towards his friends. Guys, it's just the media. The media? Those hooligans have no sense of respect or propriety. Why dash? Not now, Tinya. See if you can find Ochako. We need to get this crowd controlled or somebody's going to get hurt. Right. Pushing through the crowd, he finally found her and managed to get zero gravity applied to himself. The ensuing slam into the wall above the door had Django in stitches, but at least Tinya got the job done. Django would never let him live down the emergency exit nickname, however. Nizu and the teachers stared at the remains of the gate. The wind picking up made the ashes stir in the wind, and he could smell the lingering taste of death in the air. Now the question? Is this merely the act of a lone villain, or a declaration of war? He knew that having All Might here would serve as both a boon and a risk. A boon. This was something that few understood about UA, and especially his position as principal. If anything, it could be compared to the underground. Backroom deals, favors, concessions, and negotiations. Aizawa didn't understand, or rather, while he understood how the underground worked, he didn't live through it every day. Not like he did. Now, it should be noted that the keyword is compared, that in of itself insinuates that the relationship between these two are not exactly the same. The HSBC has always wanted UA, the latter being one of the only schools that was not under their direct control, especially with him at the helm. As such, there has always been a conflict of opinions, goals, methods, management, everything. Unfortunately, a good amount of funding also came from the HSBC. As such, the battlefield was always tense, a balance held upon a knife's edge. So many programs he would like to begin, especially to help the students that fell through the cracks. Shota Aizawa was an exception to the rule. The rules needed to be changed, and All Might's influence could be the push needed to implement those programs, change the requirements, create the heroes that the world needed, not just the heroes that the HSBC wanted. And a risk, because now that everybody knew that All Might was here, students were even more at risk of becoming targets. It was not rare for villains to try and attack the hero students in the making, although the few that attempted so were ruthlessly eliminated. It was worse for those that weren't even in the hero course. If anything serious happened, it could very well be the excuse needed for the HSBC to demand more control, especially with the support of the people. Humans, such fickle creatures. So much potential. So much wasted. Either way, it seemed as if a new adversary has entered the game. Now the question, what will happen next? Everybody was eagerly anticipating class. They'd heard that today was going to be another big day, and as such were wondering what exactly was coming up. Aizawa walked and noticed that everybody was already in their seats, commending them for their improvement. Today we're doing rescue exercises. Take your costumes, or not, don't really care, but it's a good idea to see what can be improved. We'll be taking a bus to another part of campus, so meet me in 15. Aizawa finished before walking out. Immediately, everybody got excited and changed as fast as they could to make it in time. Izuku himself barely paid attention to everybody's comments, himself remembering the countless times that he saw All Might's debut. Rescuing people had been the entire reason that he wanted to be a hero. He wanted to save them with a smile, just like All Might. He could hear the reassurances of his brothers inside of him, and he could feel One for All surging inside of him, as if it recognized a part of its purpose. Bah, he was overthinking things. It's not like One for All was alive, right? Either way, as they rode the bus towards their destination, Tenya had tried to do a seating order only for it to fall through at the bus design. Izuku began speaking with his clones, discussing ideas as to what to do so that they could also practice rescue techniques. There was serious consideration of seeing if they could drag a teacher into the mindscape, or at least some teaching tools. Recently, Django had been discussing with the clones as to what specific aspects of heroism they wanted to do. However, the general consensus is that they should learn all aspects before devoting themselves to specific jobs. Already some clones were asking about finding resources to become certified medics. Others were asking for more training with demolitions experts and more marksmanship training with snipe. His biggest problem at the moment was simply summoning them. He didn't know what was happening with his quirk. It seemed as if something was blocking him from summoning more clones, which was odd. He thought that by using One for All, he'd be able to summon them. Such was the case with Fordo, but so far all that he'd done was just create more damn clones. According to them, it was starting to get a bit overcrowded. He hoped that he would figure it out soon. Midoriya-chan. He heard, breaking him from his thoughts. Turning to his classmate, he remembered her as Azui Tsuyu, the girl with the frog quirk. Yes, Azui? Call me Tsu, she interjected. Other than the clones, your quirk kinda reminds me of All Might. A few noises of agreement rang out, but Kirishima was quick to butt in. Well, yeah, but All Might doesn't break himself with his strength either. Yeah, what's with that? Oh, it's simple. My strength is proportionate to the clones I have within me. On my papers, it's said as the strength of 1,000 clones. Although that's a bit of a lie since I have more. I should be able to control that strength one day, but until then, well, it is what it is. It is what it is. Kaminari laughed out only for everybody to stare at him awkwardly. Sorry, pre-quirk memes. He sheepishly said while rubbing the back of his head, his face red from embarrassment. Dude, that was so cringe, even I'm feeling embarrassment for you, Kyoka said while shaking her head. Izuku mildly snorted, but was soon distracted by Kirishima. Man, your quirk's super flashy and versatile though. You've got a literal army at your fingertips. You'll definitely go into the big leagues. I can just harden my skin. That may be true, but don't put yourself down, Kirishima. Each quirk has its own use and potential. You can make it too. Speaking about flashiness, I guess we should include Todoroki and Bakugo, Sue said with a finger on her cheek. What do you mean by should? Although with that personality, I doubt that Bakugo will be popular. Say that again. I dare you, Froggy Extra. Yeah, I mean, we've been in school only for a couple of days and everybody already knows that your personality's like a dumpster fire full of trash. Bakugo roared in anger at Kaminari, who in turn scooted back. Ah, don't worry, Bakugo. Maybe you'll be popular like those angry Pomeranians. Django intervened, causing Bakugo to turn his attention to the clone. About to start another tirade, they were all interrupted by Aizawa. Ordering them off the bus, they made their way in front of a large building with the letters USJ in the front. Wow, is this Universal Studios Japan? The class said as a whole, many of them taking in as much detail as they can. Actually, it's the unforeseen simulation joint. Another voice said cheerily, Said voice was another hero in a large puffy spacesuit with a black dome for a helmet. Ochako was the first to recognize her.
Ah,
It's the space hero, 13. She's my all-time favorite. Ochako squealed and started to bounce around in excitement. Her friends chuckled in amusement, but that didn't lessen their excitement. Aizawa walked up the steps until he was close to 13. They all heard something about All Might, but only Izuku and Django noticed the 3 fingers that 13 put up. Damn it, All Might. You overworked yourself again. Izuku thought before glancing at Django. Their eyes meeting, they both knew that they would have to talk to All Might about his bad habits. Oh well, nothing we can do now. Heading inside, 13 addressed them. Now, before we begin, I have a couple of points that I'd like to go over. As many of you may know, my quirk is called Black Hole. Yeah, you can suck up and disintegrate things. You've been instrumental in countless rescue operations. This time it wasn't Izuku who gave the analysis but Ochako with stars in her eyes. That is true, but what is also true is that my quirk has the extreme capability to kill. That took the wind out of everybody's sail and a somber silence filled the atmosphere. The entrance exam was the first time you could go all out with your quirks. Aizawa's apprehension test helped you discover your limits. All Might's class helped you see your capacity to do harm. Today, it is my goal for you to discover how to use your quirks to save lives. 13 said. The class soon started clapping in appreciation, hoping to take these words to heart and learn. Heading inside, they were all amazed by the sheer scale of the building and the various zones that were available for rescue simulations. As the doors fully shut, however, the lights began to flicker and their attention was brought to the center of the plaza. A dark mist began to appear tinged with purple before spreading out widely. From the mist came dozens of villains, the most prominent being a man in black with hands all over his arms and head, and what looked like a monster, larger than All Might with charcoal skin. The thing was scarred, with a beak for a mouth and an exposed brain. Izuku didn't know what he was looking at, only that it was an abomination. Whoa, is this a part of the simulation? Get back! Aizawa yelled as he prepped his capture scarf. These are real villains. The doors are shut. Real villains? What the hell is happening? The students started to panic and huddle together. Meanwhile, the apparent leader made his own observations. What's this? Just 13 and Eraserhead? The schedule said that All Might was supposed to be here. So you're the cause behind yesterday's trouble. No matter. I guess we gotta take care of the grunts before we get to the boss level. 13. Protect the students. Try and reach the main campus. Eraserhead, wait. There's too many dash. No heroes, a one-trick pony, Midoriya. Aizawa yelled while leaping towards the crowd of villains.
no.
That's not a damn it. He should have stayed here and 13 could have sucked up the doors. Izuku cursed before summoning Fordo and calling Django to his side. Keep an eye on him. Use the snipers. Izuku paused as he considered the range and the situation. Don't bother with stunners, but keep it non-lethal. He shuddered a bit, not wanting to cause such damage. But these were real villains, and considering the ringleader's words, this was a situation of life and death. Damn it, All Might. Once we get out of this, I'm gonna shove my boots so far up your ass. He then turned towards 13. 13. The doors. 13 paused at the order from a student, but nodded and aimed her quirk at the doors. The priority, after all, was evacuating the students. Just as the doors started to crack and break apart, the same shadowy mist appeared in front of them. Pardon the intrusion, young students, but we are the League of Villains. There seems to be a scheduling error. Was All Might not supposed to be here? No matter, either way, today he dies. Kirishima and Bakugo leapt at the villain, disregarding 13's warning. Their attacks proved themselves useless as the mist simply reappeared somewhere else. Oh? Such initiative. Unfortunately, it was useless. Either way, I must complete my duty and scatter you to your deaths. The mist expanded and consumed the majority of the class.
No.
Izuku cried out. One for All charged through his body and he shot forward towards the mist center. 15%. Izuku spun his body like a corkscrew and aimed true. Kansas smash. His fists impacted against the metal collar that the villain wore, sending him crashing against the doors. As I thought, you can't be all mist. Those two knuckleheads might have jumped the gun, but at least they revealed a weakness. The mist man groaned in pain. Perfect indents of Izuku's fists had been left on his collar and his body had been revealed, showing him to be a well-dressed man with a misty body. It seems that I left the true golden apple here. Ugh, no matter. My duty remains the same. Midoriya, move. 13 cried out as she uncapped her finger. Midoriya leapt away with a grimace, landing and stumbling slightly, his body screaming in pain. He had gone way over his current limit to do that smash. Looking, he saw that Ishido, Ochako, Tenya, Satu, and Shoji were still here at the plaza, and Django and Fordo were focusing on the plaza. We need reinforcements. We need the teachers here. Tenya can sustain his speed a lot more than I can. I just need an opening. Izuku's mumbling was cut off as he heard a horrifying scream. Turning, he saw 13's own quirk used against her. Half her suit was torn apart, and her body fell to the ground.
I'm sorry, kids.
She groaned out.
No.
Aizawa was in a pickle, and he admitted to himself that he probably should have stayed up there with his students, especially since he lost track of the warper. He could only hope that 13 was handling it, using his capture tool to bind two villains and slam them together. Unfortunately, another mutant type, one that reminded him of a minotaur, came behind him and nearly clipped him. That is, if it wasn't for the two energy bolts that impacted against the beast, putting him out of commission. That must be Midoriya, or his clones. They're supposed to be getting out of here, dash. He pulled another villain towards him before snapping her chin back with a kick and using her as a bowling ball. Looks like they have a sniper. Kurogyri better take care of it. The battle slightly paused as a small explosion of wind appeared at the top of the stairs, but a few more sniper rounds and Aizawa breaking more bones got the villains back on track. Looks like something's going on up there. At least I have some cover, Aizawa thought as a few more villains around him were shot. Fortunately, the shots weren't piercing, but they were certainly burning them. Not that he cared very much at the moment. Kurogyri rose weakly. Quite simply, he was still rattled by the hit he'd taken. If he were not to die today, he would surely be a threat. He thought before a searing pain made itself known in his stomach. Falling to his knees, Kurogyri had to force himself to stay awake. Arg! Izuku's smoking barrel was pointed at him. A hard glare in his eyes spoke wonders of his intent. Tenya, I'm gonna blow the doors wide open. When I do, run. Get help. I can't abandon Yo Dash. That's an order. Izuku screamed as he sped towards the door. He didn't want to risk not opening the doors on the first try. So charging one for all to 30%, he prepared to unleash another smash.
Smash.
Not so fast. Kurogyri yelled as his body exploded into mist. Both were consumed and disappeared. Izuku. VOD. The main plaza was a mess of bodies, Aizawa having decimated the villains around him with the help of the snipers. TCH, I hate it when pros live up to the hype. But at the same time, 3, 2, 1. He sped forward and grabbed Aizawa's elbow, the cloth and skin immediately cracking and falling apart. Aizawa quickly knocked Shigaraki away. Your hair's a nice tell. You've been erasing quirks left and right, and that timer's gone down. You're a rogue, not a paladin. So you're not used to big fights like this. Even with your ranger bud dash, the shot almost hit him. But it was blocked by the absolutely enormous beast that stood before him. That sniper's annoying Nam dash. He was cut off by the appearance of Kurogyri's portal and the absolute explosion of wind that appeared, knocking everybody on their ass. Kurogyri's body flopped onto the ground, unconscious from the last portal he'd made, while Izuku was flung towards Aizawa, the force of his strike making him a rocket. Midoriya, ugh. Aizawa grunted as the two were sent towards the stairs. Kurogyri, TCH, you're useless. If you're here and out, then that means somebody's probably escaped. That means reinforcements. It's game over. We might as well leave. The man started to rant and rave about the situation before calming down and talking about leaving everything behind. Midoriya and Aizawa stared at him in disbelief before looking at each other in suspicion. That's not right. But first, let's wreck the symbol of peace's pride. Izuku saw it happen in slow motion, the man's hand extending towards Azui's face, the latter frozen in fear. One moment he was with Aizawa. The next he stood before her, fist raised at the ready. Don't touch her. Detroit smash. The ensuing force ripped through the plaza. The water from the water zone was pushed back, basically becoming a reversed tidal wave. The cement cracked and cratered around the epicenter of impact, and the resulting winds blew everybody away, including the various bodies on the floor. Izuku's eyes were wide in shock. The same black creature from before had taken Izuku's 100% punch, and it did no damage. The same could not be said for Izuku, already damaged from going over his limit, and popping off a 30% punch before this 100%. His arm was a mangled mess now. His right leg, which he used to push off, was now an angry purple, and blood was starting to pour down his body. Perhaps if he had started off with the 100% against this creature, it wouldn't have caused so much damage. Detroit smash, huh? I guess you're a fan of All Might? The main villain said. His attention was completely on Izuku, even choosing to ignore Aizawa, who had grabbed Tsu and some other students with his capture weapon and bring them back towards him. Midoriya, get out of there. And that strength is nothing to laugh at. Eraserhead was the mini-boss. But it looks like you're the gatekeeper to the final dungeon. Are you seriously quoting gaming stuff to me? The man ignored him, continuing on with his spiel. So let's continue. Either way, I have to wait for my escape teleport to work. Izuku deadpanned at the childish man. Nomu. Izuku stiffened as he felt the creature rise and look even taller. Kill the dash. Phew. Nomu groaned as it collapsed. The large burning hole in its head smoked from the full charge round that punched through its head. What? That's impossible. An OMU was made to take on All Might, and he's taken out from across the map. I call hacks. Aimbot. Whatever. Looks like you've bitten off more than you can chew. D-cut. Now surrender, or that next shot goes through you. Izuku growled while prepping one for all again. Aizawa had already ordered the students to go up the stairs and found himself next to Midoriya. Midoriya, leave this to me, he said, but Izuku shook his head. All due respect, sir, I got range, he said while pulling out his pistol. The man started to rage and scratch his neck compulsively, growling at everything. Then something else growled. Everything went still and everybody stared as the creature stood up, the hole in its head slowly regenerating until it was left exactly as before. The man began to laugh. I can't believe I forgot about that. That's impossible. The strength that he has, the sheer durability, and now regeneration. HAAA, like I said, Nomu was made to take out All Might. He's the bioengineered anti-symbol of peace. Shock absorption, high-speed regeneration, super strengths, and speed. He's exactly what we need. Izuku gulped. If this guy was serious, then that means that they really did need help. Hopefully, now that Kurogyri was here, the others managed to get Tenyo out for reinforcements. Get them, Nomu. Faster than the blink of an eye, Nomu struck. Aizawa screamed as he was slammed into the stairs, the creature having been too fast for him to react. The dust settled and he was unconscious, bleeding horrendously from his body. Sensei. Pulling out his pistols, he fired them at max power. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air as he assaulted the Nomu with relentless blasts. Soon enough, however. Click-click. Damn it. The higher settings punch through him like paper, but it wastes the battery. The Nomu moved before he could even think. He raised his arms and just barely missed getting a fist to the chest. The impact itself was brutal, and he was also sent flying into the stairs. As the dust cleared, Izuku's body was broken. His arms were shattered, and he'd broken multiple ribs from the impact, and his leg was destroyed from the earlier jump. Damn it. I couldn't do anything. Willing himself to stay conscious, Izuku knew that he had to stand up, had to do something. He could not let his friends die. I have to rise. Brothers, help me. Boom. Heat and smoke waved over him, and Izuku stared at the Nomu's new position, just in front of the ringleader who'd been knocked on his ass by the shockwave of the explosion. Think it's gonna be that easy, handjob? Think again. Django cried out as he landed on the ground, pistols at the ready. Another mini-boss? Or just a mob? No matter, let's just clear this level and go home. Django cracked his neck. Truth be told, he was afraid. Not for himself, but for his brother, his friends. All Might. But like All Might said, whenever you're afraid, smile to trick the fear inside you. Well, he was wearing a helmet, but it was the thought that counted. Izuku stared, breathing heavily. Django, good luck. They were all going to need it. Author. And that's a wrap for now. I admit I want to write more, but hey, dramatic tension and all that. Again, thanks to everybody for sticking by this story. The next update will come by soon. In the next chapter, expect to see the rest of the USJ. Now, for an omake. The sacred food. The day of the entrance exam, Izuku and Django felt confident that they could handle it. As it was, 77 still needed a bit more time, and they needed to practice more in working as a team. As it was, Inko took the opportunity to get to know 77. Knowing that Django had a different personality than Izuku, she expected for all of them to be different and introduce him to her son's favorite food. I know that Izuku and Django love this stuff to death, but it can't be that good, right? At least have some variety. He thought as Inko set a plate in front of them. Thank you, ma'am. Oh, there won't be any ma'am here. I consider all you clones as my boys. Inko said before heading back to the kitchen. 77 smiled before grabbing one of the cutlets and taking a bite. His eyes widened. Needless to say, 77 didn't care much about variety anymore. Chapter 6. Against all odds. Legion. Against all odds. Trust in your friends, and they'll have reason to trust in you. All Might honestly felt like utter trash. He'd started off this morning coughing up blood but still smiling brightly. He'd at first been unsure about joining UA to find a successor, the entire reasoning becoming mute once he found young Izuku. Since then, he'd started waking up with an old forgotten feeling in his chest. Excitement. Actually looking forward to a new day. Of course, being a hero was never boring in any sort of way, except for the paperwork, but somewhere along the line, he'd become stagnant. His actions as All Might were so encompassing in his life that he practically knew nothing else. And so it became the same thing every day. Of course, he loved his duty, and he loved seeing people smile, and he most certainly didn't want to appear ungrateful to his master's sacrifice. But before he knew it, he'd become a robot, merely doing the same actions every day. Or rather, for 3 hours every day. A part of him wondered for how long had Yagi Tashinori and All Might become two entirely separate people. A part of him wondered if it even started before his fateful fight almost 6 years ago. And then he met Izuku and Django, and he felt happy. He felt true joy, helping the both of them understand some of the truths of being heroes, the old roots of community service, and helping people smile and be happy. What it meant to truly be a hero. He wondered if this is how Nana felt when she met him, maybe even Gran, when he wasn't making him puke up breakfast, last night's dinner, and yesterday's lunch. All Might woke up today with excitement in his heart to see his protege and be a part of his growth, and for the longest time, All Might smiled as Yagi Tashinori. Now, however, Yagi Tashinori sat on a couch in the teacher's lounge with a cup of steaming tea in his hands, about to be lectured by Nizu over wasting his 3 hours before the school day even started. Ah yes, Nizu. Yagi knew admittedly little of the workings of the Chimera's inner mind. Not that he wanted to, but he was no fool. He understood perfectly how his recent position as a new teacher would help in Nizu's little games. Sometimes he thinks even his old nemesis would shudder in fear had the principal become a villain instead of a hero. He prefers not to let such thoughts arise. Thinking about your boys, Yagi? He grunted in surprise at the question and slightly blushed but nodded. Among other things, sir, he murmured with a fond smile as his thoughts were returned to the two boys. Careful, All Might, or else rumors might spread if you keep smiling like that. Nizu chuckled as Yagi blushed even more and grumbled in indignation. Not you too, sir. If there was one thing he would change, it would be Django's penchant for unsavory jokes. Sorry, old friend, but I'm afraid young Django is rubbing off on me, Nizu said with a grin as Yagi shuddered. The day that Nizu met Django was the best/worst day of his life. A few months ago. Well, All Might was certainly having a good day. He'd just recently passed on his quirk to Izuku, and by now he should have finished digesting it. Now if only he could get Django to stop making the jokes about his character. He watched proudly as he saw his successor cock back his fist. ready to be blown away, just as he blew away Nana the first day that he used it. He did not expect Izuku to stumble and fall onto the ground, nor for Django to retch and also stumble before half-crawling, half-running towards Izuku. All Might was quick to follow. What happened? Bleg, the power, one for all. The D-Cut tried to shove all of it into his arm and release. The energy buildup was too much and woke up every single one of the VODE, and they shouted at once in the mindscape, Django said as he shuddered while All Might looked over Izuku and applied what first aid he could. The what? The VODE, Django tried to explain but then shook his head. He'd save it for later. The brethren. All the clones are in the mindscape right now, and they're probably panicking. Django trembled in shock. He wasn't used to this, and while he was doing admirably well, All Might could see the sheer worry in his frame. He needs medical attention. I can take him to UA. There's a doctor there who knows everything, All Might said while picking up Izuku's unconscious body. Django gulped and stared in apprehension. This would be the first time that he would ever leave Izuku alone, but he trusted All Might to help his VOD. With a shaky nod, he disappeared. All Might always felt wonder at the relationship the two held. If he didn't know the truth, the brotherhood they shared was simply unreal. Rocketing into the sky with Izuku, within a few minutes he was barreling through UA's gates, opened of course, and speeding through the halls and surprising quite a few students. Recovery Girl was not amused when she walked into her office to find Yagi huddled over a boy who was burning up with a fever with a sheepish grin. Now what? It would be later after she'd heard the explanation and treated the boy, that Nizu would then come by, tea in hand, an interesting grin on his face. Such an interesting day, huh, Yagi? Said man was already in his shrunken form, hunched over and waiting for his successor. Perhaps more than just a successor? Nizu thought before a sudden voice made him spill his tea. He'll be fine, buoy All Might, Django said tiredly from behind Nizu. He looked utterly exhausted and blearily looked around the room. Looking down and seeing the creature below him, Django had one thing to ask. Who's the plushie? All Might spat blood. Why young Django? That's Principal Nizu. Huh. All three of them stared at each other. All Might in shock, Django in slowly growing realization and horror, and Nizu in amusement. Well then, this is certainly interesting. Present day. Since then, Nizu had taken a special interest in Django, as one of the few recorded instances of sentient quirks. But Nizu did not see Django as a mere quirk, no, he saw him, and potentially the rest of his brothers, as something else. What that was, Yagi held only an inkling to, but even he had his theories. That Django was more than meets the eye, more than just a quirk. He knew that while he'd been focusing on Izuku's training before school started, Nizu had spoken multiple times with Django, and recently, he'd started to learn Mandoe, or rather, from just a few pages of notes and translations by Django, Nizu had deconstructed and then helped reconstruct the language into something a bit more complex and official. Yagi had his suspicions that Nizu would more than likely try and get the language officially recognized. He chuckled at the thought. Now Yagi, we already know what I'm going to say, but it must be said. You must take care and manage your time wisely. Over 20 incidents solved today, but All Might, and a day's worth of teaching lost. Yagi sighed before nodding. Unfortunately, this was the hardest part of being a teacher, having to choose between the calls for help that he'd heeded habitually for the last few decades, or the calls of the young heroes in training who needed help to become the heroes of tomorrow. Especially when the future of your successor is on the line, Nizu added. And All Might felt worse. Yes, I know. There wasn't much else he could say to that. Now, moving on to other matters, I believe we should discuss Dash. Yagi grunted in pain, as his mind was suddenly assaulted. He could feel it, coursing throughout his body, an inexplicable pain that made him choke. Fear, anger, hatred, suffering. One for all screamed. Yagi Tashinori collapsed on the ground, blood spewing from his body, wondering if he was finally dying. Oddly enough, he wasn't afraid for himself. He'd completed his duty honorably, and had even avenged his master, even though the action had led to his current state. He was worried for his successor, Izuku and Django. He didn't want them to live without him. As he absent-mindedly noticed Nizu calling for help, the other teachers soon arriving with Recovery Girl, the blackened vision slowly consuming him, he wondered, when did All Might and Yagi Tashinori start becoming one again? Bakugo Katsuki was in one word pissed. Yesterday had been an absolute blow to his pride. Deko had not only beat him, he'd shot his ass. And then, the principal scolded him over blowing the hell out of that building and almost killing Deku? Since when did people even care? What did it even matter if, in the end, he won? That's the entire point of heroes after all. Either way, today was even worse. Not only did he fail to beat that misty bastard, but now he was even worse than useless after falling into the water and having to get saved onto a boat. If All Might could see him now. Now he was with the frog extra that had dared to insult him, and the midget extra that dared to cry in his presence like the whiny extra that he was. And what was with that costume? He hated his father's career, but some things had bled in. And that monstrosity wasn't even worth the insults that would come out of his mouth. As he stared at the sparky extra that was next to him, however, well, at least one thing was good today. Hey, what are you Zayup? Later, after the four of them finally managed to make it to shore, Katsuki was finally dry enough to explode and really cause some damage. We need to get out of here. Back to the door. Screw that. I'm going to kill some villains. If you extras want to run away, then you might as well be useful and take numbnuts with you. Azui grimaced at the boy but nodded and drug Kaminari away, Mineta trailing behind. At least, she tried to. As they walked, they were suddenly surprised by finding the battlefield right in front of them. Dozens of bodies littered the ground. Many of them were groaning in pain, a few silent. Many of them had round burns on their bodies. The tougher ones had holes. The group paused, and even Bakugo was surprised at the brutality. He recognized these marks. What happened here? Look, Aizawa-sensei. Azui pointed towards the man who was fighting off some villains. Every now and then they'd catch a flash of blue and another body would fall to the ground. That must be Midoriya. He's sniping from up top. Bakugo growled at his mention, but they were all distracted by a black portal arriving and the absolute windstorm that threw them all off their feet. Azui was heavily disoriented from the blast, having knocked her head against the ground. Shakily getting to her feet, she was completely unprepared for the handman to come after her, nor for Midoriya to defend her. Don't touch her. Detroit smash. The wind attack blew everybody away even more. Even she wasn't able to escape it and was sent flying away as well. Before the darkness took her, the last thing she saw was Midoriya standing tall and the creature falling. Todoroki stood alone, as he always did. He needed nothing, and he needed no one to prove his strength. Regardless of what happened during the battle trials, he would still become the #1 hero. And he would do it all using only his mother's power. So, when he finds himself surrounded by fire that paled in comparison to his, but still managed to piss him off, he decided to freeze the entire zone. What villains were with him were also completely frozen solid and dearly afraid. WW hell is this? One asked as Todoroki walked forward, his right side having traces of frost covering it, but he paid no mind. I'd rather not be forced to kill, but pretty soon frostbite is about to kick in. I can settle for amputation, however. The man was shaking at the monster that was before him. This was a UA student? Now, tell me, what exactly is your plan here? Later, after knocking all of them unconscious, Todoroki left the zone to see if he could find any other villains to eliminate. Suddenly, from the center of the plaza, was an explosion of energy, a large pillar of green erupting from the center plaza, lighting coursing all around it. Lightning that was familiar. Todoroki narrowed his eyes. Midoriya, Yaoyorozu, Hagakure, Kyoka, and Yuga had found themselves alone on the mountaintops. The latter had taken a very nasty fall against a cliffside and had tumbled down a good 15 feet before stopping. His armor, dented, cape ruined, and bloodied from the many cuts and bruises he had. He was honestly considering having his armor upgraded like Fordo recommended. The worst part was that his belt was cracked, so he was completely useless. Again, all that shiny armor won't do anything to help you, Yuga. Ah, but then the people shall not see my sparkle. It had become a recurring argument in their newfound friendship. Never again. Yuga was hoping to at least keep the cape, however. If he lived through this, that is. Groaning and trying to sit up, he winced at the sharp pain that went through his ribs. The girls had quickly found him, however, and drug him to an alcove before they were assaulted by villains. Kyoka and Yaoyorozu worked together to defeat them, while Hagakure applied what little first aid she knew. Kyoka and Yaoyorozu did not know each other. Having gone from barely interacting class to fighting back-to-back against a couple of dozen villains, quickly made them learn to trust each other. As it was, Kyoka was seriously concerned about the lack of protection that both of them had. She'd been lucky and landed close to the ground, but she saw how Yuga with all of his armor ended up. Yeah, definitely was going to look into something. Maybe Izuku could help? She'd at least like to keep her rocker style. Definitely going to talk with Momo about her costume, though, because as it was, that leotard was not helping. The cannon she made, though, was helpful. As she blasted another group of villains with her sound waves, she forced herself to ignore the screams they made and the blood that ran down their ears and noses. But she didn't know how much longer she could last. Exhaustion seeped into her bones and fatigue plagued her. She could feel the stress on her Jackson heart, and every blast now caused her to wince as the vibrations traveled through her body. Finally, the last villain was defeated, rendered unconscious by a cannonball to the torso. Kyoka allowed herself to fall to her knees and rest. She shouldn't have. A hand grabbed the back of her neck, and she felt electricity burn her while she screamed in agony. "Now that I have your attention, little heroes," the final, hidden villain said as Kyoka cursed for letting herself get taken hostage. She should have heard him coming, but she was so tired that she couldn't even resist his grip. "Now, girlie, why don't you and the rest of your friends come out of that hidey hole? Don't want anybody to get hurt, right?" he said maliciously while Kyoka weakly struggled against him. Yaoyorozu grimaced but was saved from having to do anything as Hagakure and Yuga walked out of the alcove, the latter leaning heavily on the girl and having torn up parts of his cape serve as bandages across his armorless chest. "Now, this is what's going to happen, dash." The villain was cut off as everybody was startled by the eruption of energy coming from the main plaza. Like living lightning, it tore through the air vividly, almost as if it were alive. "Izuku," Kyoka thought before taking advantage of the opportunity and jamming a jack into the man's chest and blasting away. The man screeched in pain as he let go, but not before delivering a brutal shock to Kyoka that sent her flying towards her friends. She was grabbed by Yaoyorozu and dragged back towards the other two, just barely keeping consciousness. "You brat. I was planning on letting you go after a bit of fun, but now I'll kill all of you," the man yelled as he started to charge up his attack. Yaoyorozu tried to create something, but her body's stores had already been depleted, and she was exhausted. Yuga started to charge an attack, ignoring the pain that was already setting into his stomach. Weak blue sparks started to appear around his belt's cracked mirror, and he groaned as he tried to do something. Hagakure could only hold on to them both, trembling, unable to do anything to help her classmates. The man roared. A flash of blue. The smell of burnt flesh filled their noses, and they could only stare in shock. He choked, a sort of weakened gasp only just barely escaping from his throat as the four stared at him. They could see the other side of the mountain through his head. A few sparks came out of his body as he twitched and fell over. His body landing with a harsh crash, and a rattle came from his throat as he expired. Yaoyorozu heaved, but nothing came out. Hagakure shakily fell to her knees before retching behind them, an odd scene of vomit coming out of thin air that would be amusing at any other time. Kyoka could only stare before the day's events caught up to her, and she finally passed out from adrenaline and exhaustion. And Yuga could only stare, forcing himself to look away. He returned his vision to the pillar of energy that was still raised in the sky, and the sounds of war that he could hear from oh so far away. "Izuku, Django, Fordo."
I'm sorry.
Ojiro and Kirishima had found themselves fighting together, and had actually proved themselves to be pretty good at working together even with the constant risk of the ground giving away under their feet in the landslide zone. As Kirishima bashed his opponents with his hardened fists, Ojiro managed to use him as leverage to deliver brutal strikes against his opponents. Such as now. Kirishima headbutted a man that looked like a goat, and Ojiro leaped off his back before spinning and crashing down his tail on the man's head with all the force of a Beyblade. Granted, a 180 pounds Beyblade, but a Beyblade nonetheless. Man, these villains are so unmanly. Not only do they attack a school, but they really suck. Ah yes, and then there was Kirishima's manliness thing. Ojiro honestly had no clue what the hell he was talking about, but considering how he was comparing himself to a Beyblade, he had no room to say anything. We need to make it back. Gotta make that mist man pay, Kirishima said while delivering a haymaker to some villain with a dog motif. And no, it was not his quirk. Ojiro shook his head before breaking another villain's arm when he tried to pin him, the man's shrieks soon being silenced by a tail to the head. We need to find the others and regroup. They may not be handling themselves as well as we are, Ojiro replied as the area around them was finally cleared of villains. Yeah, I guess you're right. I wonder how Kirishima's thoughts were interrupted as the both were startled by the pillar of green energy that exploded in the central plaza. From their angle, they could see that it was just at the bottom of the stairs, but other than that, they couldn't see any details. We need to move quickly. Right. Siro was having the time of his life actually. Sure, he was in mortal peril, but being in the ruins zone was the best thing that could have happened to him. All the buildings and high places allowed him to swing around, make traps, and use ambush attacks to defeat his enemies. Sure, hit and run attacks might not be the most heroic thing, but since his life was on the line, there wasn't really much he could say. As he led another group of stupid villains into an alley and plucked them off one by one, he did his best to keep himself out of sight. At once, all of the villains that were below him were distracted, and admittedly he was distracted too by the giant green pillar that just appeared out of nowhere. Let it not be said, however, that Siro Hanta was not an opportunist. Trying his best at imitating a move he'd seen Aizawa-sensei move as he tried to wrap a bunch of villains and then smash them into the ground. He managed the first part, not the second. He soon decided that discretion was the better part of valor, and simply noped the hell out of there. He'd already exhausted a lot of options, and his tape would provide time, and he was running out. Already he could feel the effects of dehydration. Yeah, he could really use a drink right now. I need backup, hopefully. I can get ahead far enough to warn the others in time to face off against these villains. He thought as he swung down the ruins zone towards the main plaza. Tokoyami and Koda did not expect to find themselves together inside the rain zone. Koda did not expect his new companion to utterly devastate the enemies that were in the downpour storm zone with them. His quirk, Dark Shadow, proved itself to be a worthy adversary when inside the darkness of the zone as he grew to monstrous size, just barely within Tokoyami's control as the monster reveled in the destruction it caused and the pain it unleashed against the villains that dared to attack it. Koda was more than thankful that his quirk was merely speaking with animals. Neither of them noticed the pillar of light that pierced the skies, separated as they were from the rest of the USJ. But Koda was worried. Due to his quirk, he could not only understand animals, but understand their instincts as well, and could gain some insight from them. So when the rats that he'd found suddenly cowered, crying out of great fear and rage and suffering that permeated the very essence of the building, of hatred that filled their very being, he could only hope that his classmates were all right, that they'd all make it out alive. Tenya felt horrible, unable to do anything as his friend was whisked away by the same mist villain that had sent away his classmates, his friends, and he could only watch. He prepared himself to barrel down the steps and help out his friend when Django stopped him.
No.
But Django dash. But nothing, he gave you an order, Tenya, but more than that he asked you as a friend, Django said as he held onto Tenya's wrist. You're the only one that can make it to the teachers and get us the reinforcements we need. 13 is down, and the others are unaccounted for. We need backup. Izuku gave you that order because he believed in you. Now VOD. Go. He yelled as he motioned for Shoji and Sato to pry open the door. With a great heave, they allowed enough room for Tenya to burst through and make his way towards the main campus. Koyashi, Django whispered as he saw his friend leave. Ashido, can you melt the doors? I might be able to, but the acid that I need will burn me too, she said as she started to fling acid at the doors. Django noticed her trembling and gave her a nod and a comforting pat on the shoulder. Do your best. Turning towards Ochako, who was tearfully holding on to 13. Django hugged her lightly before telling her to do her best to keep 13 alive and that they'd all get out of there soon. Where are you going? To help out my VOD. Okay, good luck. Django nodded and Fordo rose to help him, but he shook his head. No, Fordo, keep an eye on the other zones. See if you can see anybody that sees help. Django paused, as he considered everything that happened. Earlier, they'd been forced to stand by and hear Izuku get taken away by the enemy. Already they'd been forced to do some serious damage to the villains, some of the tougher ones being too strong for the lower levels, having holes put into them instead. Those shots, however, they made non-lethal. They were caught off guard by another explosion of wind from below, and they both stared at the plaza through their scopes. Harshak! That thing just took 100%, and it did nothing. We've got no choice. Aim for the head full power. On 3, 1, 2, 3. Both shots fired at the same time, practically becoming one, and with a snap it bored through the beast's head, leaving a smoking hole as it collapsed. That wasted my battery. All I have is my pistols, Django said as he tried to ignore what he'd just done. I've got one shot left. After that it's my pistols too, Fordo said while gulping heavily. They couldn't see each other past the helmets, but they didn't need to. Fordo then looked back through the scope and gasped in shock. I don't believe it. That thing's getting back up? That's impossible. Nothing should have that level of regeneration, especially not from a head wound like that. To the brain even more so. That thing's not human. I don't know what it is, but it's not human. Django rose to his feet and grabbed his pistols. Cracking his neck, he relayed orders to Fordo. Make sure they get out of here. See if you can find the others with your rifle. I'm heading down there. Koyasii, VOD, Fordo murmured as he looked through the scope at the other zones. IB Tour Jatan Tour Ashad Kewairamor. Django replied as he targeted the creature once more and shot his rocket before launching himself down with his jetpack. Fordo snorted, but then turned his scope, trusting his elder brother. Deciding to look at the zones furthest away, he noticed that the conflagration zone was completely iced over. Huh, interesting. That Todoroki kid sure knows how to make a presence. Turning then towards the mountain zone, his blood chilled as he saw Yaoyorozu, Kyoka, and Yuga against a villain with the second in his hand. Harchuk, this is bad. I can't get a good hit on him. Fordo thought with slight panic as he tried to see if he could get a better angle. Oh, Hagakure's there too, wonderful, another person to worry about. Then an explosion from below the stairs, someone screaming, and a pillar of energy erupted over the bottom of the stairs, right where the fighting was. Fordo couldn't see what in the world was happening, but he had different priorities right now. He had to trust his VOD to take care of the situation. Looking through the scope once more, he saw that Kyoka had taken advantage of the distraction and was now away from the villain, albeit probably highly injured. He noticed that the villain was charging up an electrical attack and that the group was well away from him, and wondered if he was the reason that communications were down. Either way, he took the shot. He realized too late that the rifle was still set to full power. The shot sped out the barrel and traveled quickly, and Fordo saw as it spanned hundreds of meters in seconds. He saw the hole appear in his head. He saw the man stumble before falling. He saw it all. Django was afraid, not for himself, okay, yes for himself, but mostly for his VOD, his friends, his classmates, his ever-growing family. But he could not, would not, call himself a hero if he could not stand in front of this villain and defend his brother and teacher. Defend all of them.
Kopanigan, Fot?
He asked Izuku without turning, but it seemed that Izuku could barely hear him. Good luck, VOD. He heard Izuku whisper, and gulping in apprehension, he nodded while facing the creature in front of him. All right, Shabir, prepare to get both your shebs kicked to kingdom come. Django cried out as he fired his pistols in rapid succession, all of his shots aiming for the head. He could only hope that Tenya would come back in time. Tenya barreled through the roads of the UA campus, pushing himself to go faster than he'd ever had before. His classmates' lives were in his hands. Already he could feel the harsh burn of his pipes as he was pushing engine to its utter limit, the metal becoming red-hot and the edges of his vision blackening.
No.
Gritting his teeth and growled as he pushed himself further, the main campus already within sight. Busting through the doors, and wouldn't Tensei be shocked at his lack of decorum? Tenya blasted through the halls between passing students with the speed of the bullet and the force of a rampaging bull. Not seeing any teachers, he went directly for the teacher's lounge. His engine sputtered and smoked, and he almost tripped from the sudden fault.
No.
Burst. His legs exploded in pain as he crashed through the doors of the teacher's lounge. Half unconscious from the fatigue and stress he'd built, he absent-mindedly noticed the teachers there with a skinny man that looked to be recovering from some fit and unconscious on the couch. He couldn't hear their exclamations nor demands for an explanation, just an odd ringing sound in his ears. Funny, he wondered what that meant. He could only muster enough strength for 2 words. Villains USJ. He muttered before finally passing out. Yamada Hizashi was an outgoing man. He sometimes wore his heart on his sleeve, and could admit that he could sometimes be prone to panic. Fortunately, his friendship with Shota and more than a decade's experience had tempered himself somewhat. That still didn't mean that he was prepared for the principal to call for an emergency meeting in the lounge, nor to see All Might in his skinny form, and wasn't that a surprise to see all that time ago, convulsing and coughing blood. Nor were he and the other teachers prepared for one of Shota's students to break down the door with his body and collapse on the ground. The engines on his legs ruptured and smoking like a car fire. He almost screamed in surprise. The boy didn't seem to be all there and looked delirious, which made sense because if he wasn't mistaken, Shota's class was supposed to be at the USJ right now, and that was a good 30 minutes away by bus. Yeah, this kid just ran that. Tensei would be proud. Hizashi mused before the boy's last words sent a spike of fear through his heart. Villains USJ. The lounge froze before Nizu quickly had them rally together and head back to the USJ. All Might left behind with Recovery Girl, who promised to get there as soon as possible once she deemed him stable. Altogether, it took them 2 minutes to put the entire campus on lockdown and get outside to one of Power Loader's custom transports, which they used to get everybody there as fast as they could. It then took them 10 entire minutes to get to the USJ. All right, everyone, be prepared to face villains, and remember, retrieving the students is our top priority, Nizu said, having already called reinforcements. Right before they could even enter, however, the doors exploded. Author. And that's a wrap for tonight. It is currently past 3. I'm so glad it's Sunday. Next chapter, we get into the fight of the hour. Django versus Noma. What will happen? What happened to All Might? Why did the doors explode? What will happen to Fordo? What is the pillar? All to be answered soon. I hope that this chapter was better than the last one. I really tried to give some of the others a little chance to shine, and at least get some changes in canon. At the same time, however, I'm always open to suggestions and ways to improve my writing. Some Mandoe translations. Harchuk, damn it. Koyasi means a lot of things, but the general gist is come back safely. It can also be used as a toast. Literally means stay alive. Shabir, jerk but like, super hard. You say this one to mean a fight. Shebs, literally but slash asses in. I'ma kick your ass. Navod, my friend. IB Tour Jan Tour Ashad Kyramor. Today is a good day for someone else to die. Kopani gone. Need a hand? Again, if I make a mistake, please let me know in your reviews, and I'll make sure to edit it as soon as possible. Also, question, should I keep the italics for the Mandoe to help keep it separate, or simply just leave it regular and keep the translations at the end? Also, would y'all like pronunciations? Again, thank you all for your support. Enjoy this omake I made. It's completely unrelated to Legion, but I wanted to put it out there. Chief, if by chance you're a gigantic nerd like me, then yes, your not favorite Star Wars fan, yeoman turned EPO / jack of all trades, is this level of nerd. Omake, a commanding quirk. Izuku and his male classmates were currently changing in the locker room after class when they suddenly heard a lustful giggle. Turning, they found Mineta beckoning at them to see through a hole that was in the wall. Izuku froze. Mineta then commented about the various parts he wanted to see, commenting on every girl except Jiro while the guys were scolding him. Ida in particular was the most vocal. Just before he could look through the hole and be summarily attacked by Jiro's Jack, Mineta jumped as a loud voice suddenly erupted from behind him. What the $? Do you think you're doing? Izuku yelled as he suddenly changed in demeanor. Clothes too, for that matter. As a matter of fact, everything changed around them. The locker room became a large room that was filled with double-decker beds with metal frames. Odd posters appeared in English with men and ships. Mineta suffered a change into a camouflaged uniform while Izuku was in a tan uniform with a white cover on his head and a red rope on his shoulder. A chief's cover. An RDC aiguillette. You think you can go about harassing women on my watch, recruit? And no, chief. Well, you certainly won't be doing it again. Hydrate. Mineta shakily did so. 8 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, chief. Mineta said as he lost control of his body and started to do the exercise. This went on for quite a while, actually. -7, 8. TT12, chief. Mineta muttered, already in pain. What's this? Are you quitting now? You certainly weren't about to quit earlier with that hole, weren't you? I can barely hear you. But don't worry. If you need some motivation, we'll just start again. Huya, 0. W what? Huya, 0. Huya, 0. Mineta sobbed as he continued doing his exercises. Izuku then turned to the other boys. That looks like fun, doesn't it, recruits? No, chief. They all shuddered. Izuku became a completely different person whenever he had the red rope on. I think it is, so why don't you join him? Hydrate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, chief. They all yelled as their bodies also lost control, and they were placed in uniform. Why are we even getting beat? We didn't do anything. Kaminari grumbled as he went through the exercises. 'Cause Chief said so, Kirishima said with a grin. He was one of the few that actually liked getting beat. It was why whenever Chief came out, he always ignored Kirishima. Katsuki was just pissed. The girls were very happy, however, and Mineta learned his lesson, at least for a time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 20, chief. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk, chief. Becomes a U.S. Navy chief with the power to change his surroundings fitting the situation. Beware the red rope version. I still can't hear you. Huya, 0. Huya, 0. Boot camp, how I do not miss you. Well, in any case, thanks again for reading this. Until next time, my friends.